Great. Well, welcome everybody. I see we've still got some people joining, but it is 2 o'clock. I can hear the chimes in the Breslin Tower, and I wish you all were here to hear that as well. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time and go ahead and get started. I just want to thank you all for being here. We're just so grateful for your passion for Sewanee, and we really consider you all insiders and leaders among your peers. And so the Vice-Chancellor wanted to meet with you all and sort of have an early introduction. And so that's what today's meeting is going to be about. I am Susan Askew, and I'm Associate Vice President for Alumni and Parent Programs. And I'm joined by my colleague, Bess Turner, who is the Director of Church Relations and Alumni at the School of Theology. And so we're excited to have both college and School of Theology alumni leaders on this call today. And I just want to quickly go over how it'll work, and then we'll go ahead and get started. But I will introduce our special guest, and then he will give some remarks. And then you all submitted questions, many questions ahead of time, and I have shared those with him. And anything that he doesn't cover in his opening remarks, we will delve into the questions after that. And he has not told me that anything is off limits, so I hope we can get through all the questions. And if you didn't have a chance to ask a question, if you want to use the Q&A feature down below, then if you ask your question there, then when we're finished with all the submitted ones, Bess will go into those as if we have some time. And if you use that feature, it will capture them so that if we're for some reason not able to get to them, we'll have them and we can follow up with you all. But so now I'm going to introduce our special guest. I'm very pleased to introduce Ambassador Reuben E. Brigety II, Sewanee's 17th Vice Chancellor and President. He's a native Southerner whose life and distinguished career have taken him from the U.S. Naval Academy to the University of Cambridge and from Africa to Washington, D.C. In selecting Ambassador Brigety to serve as Vice Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor Search Committee found that he is uniquely positioned, as he put it, to bring Sewanee to the world and the world to Sewanee. He's the former Dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs at the George Washington University and former U.S. Ambassador to the African Union. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and holds a master's degree in philosophy and a PhD in international relations from the University of Cambridge. He will soon be joined in Chen Hall, the Vice Chancellor's residence here in Sewanee, by his wife, Dr. Leli Selassie, and their two sons, Robel and Retta. Welcome to Sewanee, and thank you so much for speaking us today, Mr. Vice Chancellor.
Thanks very much, Susan. Good afternoon, everybody, or evening or morning, depending on where you are in the world. It's my honor to have an opportunity to chat with you all a little bit. First of all, to thank you for everything that you have done and will continue to do as alumni supporters of our university. Obviously, you all had an experience with Sewanee that was incredibly meaningful for you, and you want to see our university continue to prosper and grow to support the next generation. And I'm very grateful to you for all the work that you did and continue to do in that regard. You know, when I was ambassador to the African Union in Addis Ababa, I once had a conversation with my counterpart, the Chinese ambassador, who was there to build a brand new embassy for China. And he had done the same thing in Tehran, in Iran. And he told me this Chinese proverb that goes, we plant the trees, but others enjoy the shade. And I thought it was a very beautiful way of capturing our intergenerational responsibility as stewards, benefactors, if you will. To ensure that the rich legacy that helped to shape our lives will continue to do so for future generations. So what I'd like to do is just for a couple of minutes give you a sense of what I'm thinking at this very beginning of my tenure, and given the challenging circumstances within which we find ourselves now. Then I'm, as Susan said, I'm more than happy to take questions on anything you'd like. So on the one hand, Sewanee is a particularly unique and special place. Made so by the close connections amongst students, between students and faculty here in this glorious natural environment, with our deep roots and connections to the Episcopal Church, with their Oxbridge heritage, and rooted in a sense of place here in the South, in this part of country that is so rich in history and culture. And that amalgam, that alchemy, is one of the things that has made Sewanee incredibly special. In some ways, Sewanee is utterly ununique in the sense that we are facing the same headwinds of every other institution of higher education in the United States. If you are not a higher educational professional, there's no reason why you would need to know what I'm about to tell you. But all of higher education is facing the so-called demographic cliff for 2026. Basically, people stopped having babies at the same rate in 2008 during the 2008 financial crisis. And that first cohort of young people will be 18 in 2026 and applying to college that year. That is tomorrow. And they will be an historically small, at least 20% smaller group of young people going to, actually the overall cohort will be 20% smaller. And then when you sort of break it down in terms of who is more likely to go to college within that cohort, it gets a bit more complicated. So what you'll have is the same number of universities across the country trying to attract a much smaller pool of graduates, not just that year, but for the foreseeable future thereafter. And that group of young people will also be the most diverse group of young people ever applying to a university in American history. And so the questions for us are, how do we simultaneously preserve and extend that special alchemy that is Sewanee, even as we make ourselves more and more attractive to a smaller and smaller cohort of more and more diverse young people in an ever increasing, more competitive environment? That's the challenge. Now, that's challenging enough. But in case you haven't heard, we're also in the middle of a pandemic. And so we have an awful lot of work that we are doing to ensure that we can return students safely back to the mountain, and then we can keep them here as safely as possible for the duration of this semester, in the context of a public health crisis, the likes of which America hasn't seen in a century. And on top of that, our country is going through an historic moment of reckoning on matters of race, which I have argued publicly should be a matter of attention for every institution of higher education, both because that's where the locus of our young people are, and also if universities can't have these sorts of conversations, then who can? And that also, quite frankly, is of particular import for us at the University of the South, given our heritage, both founded by Confederates and essentially being a keeper of the flame of a lost cause for decades. And on top of all those other things, it is important for us to continue to strive for excellence in seminary education, in addition to our undergraduate education, as well as our School of Letters. The Board of Regents and confirmed by the Board of Trustees, made a very bold decision in an historic election of me, a Presbyterian, to be the leader of the University of the South. And for our friends that are cognizant of such things, I should tell you a little bit about my own faith journey and why it's relevant. So I was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition in Jacksonville, Florida, deep in the tradition of the Black Church of the South, which is a very powerful connective tissue to those people of faith who were survivors of the Middle Passage, and the faith that sustained them through the challenges of slavery and Jim Crow and over time. And as I was growing up in the faith, also very much wanted, quite frankly, for lack of a better way of saying it, a bit more intellectual and rigorous approach to my faith walk than is typical, certainly in the Baptist tradition. So both at the Naval Academy, then also when I was at graduate school in Cambridge, worshiped with Episcopalians and Anglicans, obviously in the UK. And then when I came back to resume naval service, continued to worship with Episcopalians. I did the Alpha course, and would be an Episcopalian today, were it not for the fact that when I was dating the woman who became my wife, she is Ethiopian and grew up in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which has a liturgy that is so dense and complicated it makes Episcopalians look like Quakers. And so as we were deciding our faith walk as a family together, we met in the middle and became Presbyterians. So I consider myself, relative to the Episcopal Church, a friend of the family, as it were. And so, but for sure, you will find me to continue to be committed to the heritage of the Episcopal heritage of our university, as also pointing away not only sort of forward as a common starting point for discussions of faith, but also as one who wants to ensure that we are an open and affirming campus for people regardless of their faith confession. And I don't see that those two things are in substantial tension. So finally, let me just say, because I suspect there may be some curiosity about this. So fine, Vice-Chancellor, you've given us all these challenges, so where are we going? So what I'm about to tell you is basically just in my head. It's not a matter of policy yet. You won't find it written down, but it kind of reflects my thinking of where I'd like to see the next little bit. So notwithstanding the challenges we will have this year in dealing with the novel coronavirus, I would like to call for 2021 to be a year of discernment for the Sewanee community. Students, faculty, alumni, friends, domain residents, etc., around four key strategic pillars. The first is an acronym that I call PULSE, like taking your pulse, which stands for Preeminence in Undergraduate Liberal Arts and Seminary Education. And included in that, of course, is our School of Letters. I just couldn't figure out how to make the acronym work. But basically preeminence in our core academic mission across the board, on the premise that our path to institutional longevity depends on our being objectively, consistently, irrefutably one of the top colleges of our kind in the United States of America. The reason is that as we approach the demographic cliff, essentially those schools that are in their top 25 or so of their respective categories, liberal arts colleges, four-year public flagship colleges, they're going to be fine. Everybody else are the ones that you really have to worry about with regard to the quality of their campus life and, quite frankly, even their ability to survive. As we stand here today, Sewanee is currently ranked number 43 in the U.S. News and World Report for undergraduate liberal arts colleges. That's a dangerous place to be, because it's just as easy, perhaps even easier, to slip back as it is to punch forward, and we certainly can't expect to reasonably stay still. So we have to punch up. And so the question will be, if we are agreed that preeminence is our objective across our academic mission, what does that actually look like? And what do we actually have to do objectively, in terms of objective measurable things in order to get there compared to where we are right now? Even as I say, we preserve that special alchemy that is Sewanee. The second is dialogue across diversity and difference. For all the reasons I just mentioned to you, it is actually really quite important that we focus as a community to ensure that we are intentionally building a place that is opening and welcoming to people of diverse ethnic, religious, socioeconomic backgrounds. The young people that we are educating today will be inhabiting a work world and a living world that is much more diverse than that of their parents and their grandparents. And given the demographics I just mentioned to you, it's also very important that we are seen as a place that is open and welcoming. And let me be very frank about this. For people of color, the question of what it means to be Southern or of the South is a very important question. And it makes you wonder if you actually will be accepted at a place that is of the South. Now, of course, everyone here on this call is a wonderful, decent person. But as given the history of our region, we have to be intentional about opening our doors and being welcoming to people who have historically been excluded or marginalized, particularly in our region. And I think actually the current events have actually made this question really quite clear. Are we the University of the Old South or are we the University of the New South? And I would submit that we should boldly step into being the latter, both because it is the right thing to do and also because, as I believe, our institutional future depends on it. And so we have to be quite thoughtful about what that means. And so we should have a conversation about that. The third is what I call Sewanee Global. It is my view that Sewanee should be the Aspen of the South, minus the skating. We should be a place that affirmatively places itself in the world as a place for convening around ideas and conferences on art and politics and music and culture, as a wonderful place for people to come to engage in all of these sorts of discussions and activities, to enjoy the beauty of the domain in a structure, for lack of a better way of saying it, sort of ways that we actually preserve the beauty of what we have, but also make this accessibility a bit more systematic for folks who come. And doing so will help introduce Sewanee to people that frankly may not be familiar with it, which is also quite important for the attraction of students going forward. And the final thing, in my view, that we should discuss is the economic development of the domain. So how do we simultaneously preserve and extend the natural beauty of the domain, even as we create other poles of activity that help to enrich our collective life here? Can we get some good Indian restaurants, for example? Can we get some yoga studios and a couple of other like smaller performance places and some additional vendors? Can we get another grocery store besides the Piggly Wiggly? Can we convince a trader, like those sorts of things, right? That will make life here more rich, even as they say we preserve the beauty and the majesty of the domain, and then also creates other poles of economic activity for those who dwell on the plateau, as well as creating other sources of revenue to support our core academic mission. So those are the four pillars that I think need to be considered for us to discuss together with objective, measurable outcomes. And is there some other pillar that we need to discuss that does not fit neatly in any of those four, but that nevertheless is vital for our work together over the course of the 5 years after this first year of discernment? I'll give you an example. So in one of these discussions, somebody suggested, you know what, we actually probably need to have a pillar to discuss kind of like who we are. Like what is actually the mission of the University of the South and how do we define ourselves? I was actually a bit surprised by that, because I actually thought that the Sewanee has such a strong self-identity that question would have been asked and answered and broadly understood. But maybe not, I don't know. And so if everything's a priority, nothing is, so we can't have 47 pillars that we've got to discuss over the course of the year. But there might be one, maybe two more that warrant our collective observation and discussion. So that's where we are. as of now, and these are the things that occupy my thoughts and attention as I begin my tenure. And again, thank you all for everything that you've done to be supportive of our university, and I'm more than happy to take your questions.
Thank you for that wonderful overview. We have many, many questions. Some of them are pretty similar, so I may lump some of them together. But I'm going to start with the COVID-19, and I know you mentioned a little bit just briefly, but a lot of people are asking many, many questions about how that has affected our budget. How does the fall look as far as students back on campus and athletics maybe happening or not happening? How's it going to affect social life? Can you maybe talk a little bit about all the changes that may happen?
Sure. Some of you may know, if you've watched some of our discussions, that my wife is an ICU physician. And so she has been a frontline general in the fight against COVID-19 since March, treating an ICU full of nothing but patients stricken with this god-awful disease, this beast of a disease. This is not the flu. It's horrible. And one of the things that has most disappointed me as a citizen is how politicized both our understanding of and response to this pandemic has been in our country. The reason I'm saying that is because I think it's very important that we have a common baseline as a community of what it is we're up against. We have to take the threat of the novel coronavirus very seriously. People can get it. Young people can get it. People can develop COVID-19. Young people can develop COVID-19. This is not a respiratory disease, it's a vascular disease, meaning it affects your blood vessels. It just so happens that in the weakest population, it affects the blood vessels around the lungs, the pulmonary blood vessels first, which is why access to ICU beds where you can be put on a ventilator is so significant. But even if you survive or don't have lung capacity that is fundamentally destroyed, we see evidence of young people under the age of 35 getting strokes, having various types of heart attacks. I just, on my Twitter account, just put out a story of a young woman in Pensacola who is 16 years old, who's on a ventilator with COVID-19, no underlying health conditions. As it happens, the story for the Pennsylvania Journal, the Pensacola Journal, was written by a Sewanee grad, class of 15. And so, and let me also just be very clear about this. So I've heard about the, various people saying, "Oh, we're on the mountain is magical and we'll be fine." And it's like, look, until somebody shows me the deposit of vibranium that's been hidden underneath All Saints Chapel that is magically keeping all of us safe, we have to presume that that can happen here. The AP reported that last week, there were 500 cases of the novel coronavirus in Timbuktu, in Mali, with 10 confirmed cases of COVID-19. If it can happen there, I promise you it can happen here. And the nightmare scenario is that we bring people back to campus and we have an outbreak of this disease that we can't track and we can't stop. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that there are some very, I'm sorry, I apologize for that. The good news is that there are some very simple public health interventions that we could all take I cannot talk to you right now, don't call me. That we can all take to improve the likelihood that we can stay healthy as a community. And there are two parts. The one is individual action. The second is community response. Individual action are the 3 W's. Wear a mask, wash your hands, watch your distance. Those 3 things. And when in doubt, wear a mask. With regard to community response, we are expending significant resources to ensure that we can test everybody when they first come back, and that we can do screening testing over the course of the semester, spot testing, surveillance testing, to make sure that we have the ability to quarantine and isolate people that have the novel coronavirus, so that we can track the infection rate here on campus and interrupt the transmission chain before you have uncontrolled community spread and exponential growth of the disease. Given those things, this semester will be unlike any semester in the history of this university. We will have to take a series of actions that, on the one hand, will preserve our ability to be together, even in a altered capacity, even as it will interrupt or impact that alchemy that we have traditionally known in Sewanee in terms of our closeness and proximity. But that's the trade-off. There are universities across the country that are already deciding they're going to have online education only. Or Harvard and Princeton, as you noted, decided that they're essentially going to bring back 40% of their undergraduate student body. We've done some survey work, and it is clear to us that literally over 95% of our students want to come back and say that they will do whatever is necessary in order to come back in terms of social restrictions and whatnot. And so we're going to take them at their word. And I've been messaging very hard how important it is for them to adhere to these public health standards, because if we get to a point where we have exponential growth on the mountain, and we get to a point where the local healthcare system is overtaxed, I will have to evacuate this mountain. And the only thing standing between us and that, for the most part, is everybody's compliance with the public health guidelines. Now, as it relates to finances, what I can tell you is that we're actually in very good shape. We've set aside about $2 million specifically for COVID response, things like paying for testing and paying for PPE and things of that nature. We've also have a substantial line of credit that we've negotiated to help pay for shortfalls that may come from decreases in enrollment, or that may happen as we have unexpected expenses. But we're fine for now, and actually in a much better position than the vast majority of others. So the most important thing that all of you can do to help us through this moment is tell everybody you know that's coming to the mountain, students, others, wear your mask. As it relates to athletics, we will have an announcement to make one way or the other by Friday. And about actually my next call after this is a meeting with all the other Southern Athletic Association presidents, so we can make a decision if we can come to consensus about how to approach athletics for the fall.
Thank you. And I know that you're doing all you can. You want it more than anyone to have a safe environment for our students to return. Here are some questions related to the budget. And has the endowment recovered losses incurred in the March 2020 market crash? And can you share a little bit about how that might come into play? And also along those lines, as long as we're talking about the endowment, has Sewanee made any changes to its investments to the New York Times article on its commitment to ESG investments?
Sure. So first, on the extent to which the market has recovered, or the endowment has recovered from the hit of the market crash in the spring. To be short answers, I just can't tell you. Not because I don't know. We had our I didn't mean to come out that way. Here's what I meant. That we had our first audit committee meeting last week. I sat in on it. I just, to be frank, have not given it a ton of attention because I've been focused like a laser beam in making sure that we keep everybody healthy. I have not heard from any of the regents or the that sit on the investment committee or from my staff that there is substantial concern about the future of the endowment. I suspect, actually, let me not even speculate. What I'll say is this. It is an entirely fair question. and I will make it my business to make sure I understand it more. I just have other more near-term targets in this first couple of weeks that I need to be focused on. But we are not in a danger area at all with regard to the finances of the university as a whole, certainly with regard to the endowment. With regard to ESG investments, I mean, look, my view on it is this. You know, if you could have the same rate of return and not only not contribute to companies that are carbon-based companies, and you could invest in the green economy, which is our future, why would you not do that? And if there is a difference in the rate of return, then we have to have that conversation and ask, like, what do we think the appropriate trade-off is? Again, that is a very important conversation. I expect that the regions will address it. What I can tell you is that virtually every priority that would have been a priority 7 months ago is being rethought in the context of COVID, meaning that the focus of attention of the university, certainly for the next couple of months, is making sure that we can bring everybody back together safely. And then once we get back into a kind of a more normal rhythm and learn we understand how we can live with this as a community, many of these other things that were front burner issues for strategic consideration will become so again.
Thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and get into this question. What does the university plan to do with the NABIT building given recent developments? And then there's a question along the same sort of lines on what the status is on monuments on the mountain with regards to recognizing our history.
Sure. With regard to the NABIT question, I hope you have seen that the university put out a statement last week, week before, several days ago, in which we noted the very serious charges against Mr. NABIT, as well as the facts alleged that underlie the indictment, which are profoundly disturbing. That we'll be following the process, the legal process, very closely. Of course, in the American judicial system, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and that we will be following the adjudication of this process as a means of determining what additional steps may need to be taken. So that's going to be our approach. With regard to the naming of other monuments, there has not been any other discussion about the renaming of anything else at the university, given our Confederate heritage. This clearly is a very live issue across the country right now. I suspect it will become a live issue here at Sewanee as well. And I hope that we can have these conversations with the seriousness that they deserve as we go forward.
Thank you. Here's some that are a little more personal about you. What drew you to Sewanee and why now in your career? And how do you see your role as our first Black Vice-Chancellor affecting Sewanee in general?
Yeah. So first, so I've been dean at the Elliott School for 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. And when you've been dean of a major school like that and you haven't been fired, headhunters start coming after you like, flies on honey. And so I knew that it was time for me I'd had a great run at GW, and that it was time for me to think about the next challenge. And so I was blessed to have a series of very productive conversations with a number of institutions. And the conversation with Sewanee proceeded very organically, I have to say. I'd heard of Sewanee, I'd never been here before. As I say, I am a native Southerner and I embrace that identity, I always have, with all of its complexities and complications, particularly as a Black Southerner. So when I will tell you quite frankly, you know, when I was had the first conversation with the search firm, the very first thing I asked them was, "Is Sewanee ready for a black president?" So not, I'm not coming. Like, I got other stuff to do. And I was assured that yes, that was the case. I was also assured, because the next question was, okay, fine. Here's the thing: I'm not interested in being simply an affirmative action diversity candidate in your pool. I'm good on my own. Thank you very much. So if this is not a real conversation, I'm also not interested. And they said, no, yes, we're very interested in you. We, you know, think you've got something to offer. So, and so the conversations with the search firm and with the search committee were just very special. And quite frankly, relative to other opportunities, this felt like a calling to me. And so, and this was before everything else happened, right? So, so I'm very comfortable with the notion that I think my family and I have been called to Sewanee at this time and place. Now, what does it mean to be the first Black Vice-Chancellor of the University of the South? Simultaneously, nothing and everything, right? Doesn't mean anything because COVID doesn't care what color I am. Thank you very much. Right? Like, we've got to like get through this challenge, and we've got to punch forward, as I say, for the institutional longevity of the university. Simultaneously means everything. Here's something to put in perspective. The first African American graduate of the University of the South was Judge Nathaniel Bubba Owens, who graduated in 1970. Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969. What does that mean? It means that as long as humanity has been staring into the cosmos, dreaming of being amongst the stars, it was easier to put a man on the moon than it was for a son of Africa to be welcomed with open arms and to matriculate successfully from the University of the South. The first one. And one might reasonably argue that the nature of that kind of legacy is one of the reasons why Sewanee only has 14% underrepresented, meaning 14% non-Black students today, roughly the same percentage as Washington and Lee. Our sister school, Davidson, has over twice that, and the top liberal arts colleges in the country are at near parity in terms of white and non-white students. And so my hope is that I just have a different sensibility that will help our university do what is necessary to ensure that we are demonstrably a welcoming, affirming place for students of different backgrounds to come and feel truly welcome, to have the same sense of specialness, that same taste of the alchemy that all of you have had about what makes Sewanee so special, and be part of the Sewanee family.
Thank you. I think in those comments, you've really covered most of the questions related to the topic of how Sewanee will move forward with increasing diversity. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to this question. When you use the term National Liberal College, I believe you used that in your welcome video. What does that mean?
Let me actually answer a different question that I see here from Ms. Lindsay Holland. Let me read it in the Q&A. You mentioned being more welcoming to students of color. My fear is that we will fall into some sort of affirmative action, which I strongly disagree with. I would like to be reassured there will be no preference given because of ethnicity in admissions. We are a strong legacy university, and merit-based admission has been our reputation. If you had 2 equal students to admit, will it come down to color and gender to diversify our student body under the new administration? Madam, I appreciate your question. Let me assure you the following. I do not believe that one has to trade quality for diversity. Let me say that again. I do not believe that one has to trade quality for diversity. And I also believe that it is entirely possible for us to have a very strong student body with students who merit being here on their own achievements, and for us to be a welcoming and affirming place. And so, no, to answer your question directly, I do not anticipate affirmatively not having white students here so that we could have less qualified Black students or other students of color. Rather, we will ensure that some of the best students in the country, regardless of their race, will feel comfortable applying here. And we will welcome them when they demonstrate their ability to be here. So I appreciate your question. Susan, next question.
Thank you. We have not discussed this yet, but somebody asked the question about how open to a conversation you would be about returning class reunions to homecoming in the fall.
I'm happy to have the conversation. This is, I understand that had been the case, and then it wasn't, and then it's obviously, look, I mean, all of these sorts of things are always open for, you know, it's sort of like when you rearrange the furniture in your house, you know, there's not an inherent better way of doing it, that some way may make more sense for us. Of course, I'm happy to revisit it and happy to have that conversation.
Great. Here's one. What is your vision for strengthening the university's relationship with the Episcopal Church, not just the owning diocese?
Sure. I was very pleased my first week to have a long conversation with the presiding bishop, Bishop Curry. And as I said from the beginning, it is absolutely in my sensibility and my priorities to ensure that we embrace and we elevate the Episcopal roots of this university. I'm also one who believes deeply in the value of ethics. Like the Jesuits at Georgetown, like the Jewish faith at Brandeis, I believe that the basis of our having a faith tradition gives us a useful communal starting point for us to have these questions of ethics and ethical living, regardless of what one's faith tradition is. Now, I will say this, as I mentioned before, as someone who is not an Episcopalian, I don't know how to answer the question materially about what specific steps need to be taken in order to strengthen the linkages between the university and the church. But I've also said to the chancellor, to the presiding bishop, to members of our School of Theology, I am happy to be tutored. And I will look to their collective thoughts about things we ought to do in order to strengthen those ties, as the questioner suggests.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap it up with one more question from the pre-submitted ones, because I see several that have come through since you've been talking, and I'll turn it over to Bess. But we had a couple questions about your role as mayor and how you see that fitting in and bridging the downtown businesses with the university.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I'm sorry. We had several questions asking about your role as mayor and how you see that fitting in, bridging the gap between the businesses and the university and everybody working together.
Sure. So as I told the Sewanee business community and the community council, I am not an elected mayor, but I will behave as if I were. Meaning that I will be responsive to the needs of the overall community, as I've outlined in my sort of view of our strategic questions to discern. The livelihood of and by the way, no one's told me if we were a town or a village. I hear both ways, right? And I understand that that appellation has some level of debate, but whatever it is, the place of Sewanee, that it's thriving, is important for the future of our university. And conversely, the strength and the growth of our university is actually really quite central to the thrivingness, the vitality of the community, not only the businesses, but also those residents who claim this place as home. And so that's why I wanted those last two questions, Sewanee Global and economic development of the domain, actually to be key strategic questions that y'all ought to be thinking about. Let me kind of just give you a very basic example. So to respond to the pandemic, one of the things that I did is I authorized the hiring of 2 public health officers, a senior public health officer and a public health officer. The former is a physician. The latter is not, but they both have master's degrees in public health from some of the best public health colleges in the country. They will both be community public health officers, meaning that they are not simply looking after the health of the students, but of the entire Sewanee community. Because our collective health is vital for all of us. The virus doesn't make a distinction between who's a sophomore and who's a business owner. And so it's that sort of demonstrates, there's a sort of example of the kind of thinking that I have in terms of my dual responsibilities as both Vice-Chancellor and Mayor.
Great, thank you. There's one more I just personally want to sneak in before I turn it over to Bess, but someone asked, tell us about your experience at the Naval Academy. And then they said, beat Army.
Beat Army. So in 1993, Playboy magazine, I don't read it, I just heard about it. I'm just telling you. So Playboy magazine came out with a list of the top 100 party schools in the United States of America. And it wasn't so much a list as much as it was sort of an index, right? Where like number 1 is the prototypical party school, number 100 is the antithesis of that. Number 1, prototypical party school, according to the survey, was Florida State University. I took some pride in that as a native Floridian. Number 97 was the United States Naval Academy. West Point, I think, was like 90, and the Air Force was like in the 50s. We give them endless grief about that. For those of you who may be interested, University of Chicago was number 100, the place where fun goes to die, legendarily. So for me, the Naval Academy was a very special place. It looms large in my life, in my continued sense of self-identity. My best friends on the planet to this day are my classmates and fellow peers from Annapolis. I'm very proud to have gone there. It was not, the Naval Academy is not Amherst. It's not Sewanee. It's not a place where you go to find yourself. The question is answered for you, as it were. There's one last kind of thing. It's funny. About once a month, I have a nightmare about the Naval Academy still. And it's never about anything like dangerous that we did, right? It's always about, am I in the right uniform? Am I late for formation? Whatever. I thought that I was a bit odd until at a reunion, I whispered this to one of my classmates. It's like, dude, me too. I totally have that, And then it reminded me of something. So when they have these things called Forrestal lectures, which is basically when somebody prominent comes and gives a lecture to the entire brigade of midshipmen, all 4,000 plus over at the same time. Colin Powell gave a Forrestal lecture when I was a midshipman. Margaret Thatcher did. Dick Cheney did. And we had this one Forrestal lecture with a Navy captain whose name I forgot. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam in the Hanoi Hilton, alongside John McCain. And he talked about how he had nightmares about the Naval Academy in captivity, which will give you a sense of just the kind of psychic stamp that it places on you forever. But I love it dearly, and I'm grateful every day to count myself a graduate.
Great, thank you. So we have a lot of questions in Q&A, and I don't know how okay you are with going over a little bit after.
Yeah, sure. Let me just double check that I see my neck. Yes. I think I've got time. Let me just double check. Yeah, I totally got time. Totally got time.
Okay. Well, you just, when you're ready, just say one more question and then we can wrap it up. But Beth, I'm turning it over to you.
I was just going to follow up on that last question because Norman Allen wants you to say "Go Army." You don't have to.
My eyebrows, thank you.
Okay, so how do we do a better job of protecting the health of our students, faculty, staff, and community? You've come from a smoke-free campus, and we've just built a new wellness commons. Yeah. Tobacco, alcohol, and drugs need to be addressed and support provided.
Yeah. So let's set COVID aside for a moment. And the questions of overall wellness are significant. The university is placing a series of investments in that regard, the Wellness Center being the most obvious one. We're hiring, I think, at least one more mental health counselor to help our students cope with mental health issues, as those have become more and more prominent across higher education in recent years. There is we're working on something else. I frankly just don't know how much I can say about it yet because I haven't been briefed on it. But we're working on another approach to holistic wellness that we will roll out, if not this fall, then in the spring. And hopefully just watch that space. There'll be more to say about that. I'm sorry I can't be more open about it yet. I just haven't been briefed, so if I can't brief, I don't want to tell you about it, but I know it exists. With regard to drugs and alcohol, this is an issue that has been raised with me. It was raised during the search process. Every student who meets with me talks about it. We will be having an extraordinary board meeting later this July for me to brief the board in my own right as now being in the chair as Vice-Chancellor on a series of things that we're doing with regard to COVID and a couple of other things. And one of the things we're going to be talking about is drugs and alcohol. Because the transition to a new leader is an opportunity to reset, not prejudging or passing judgment on anything that may have come before. It's just an opportunity to take a different approach. And by definition, if you want a different outcome, then you got to do some things differently. And so we'll be having that discussion to see what we might be able to do differently. On the positive side, in terms of encouraging wellness, both with our new physical infrastructures, with the new personnel that we're hiring, and also with this new approach that we're going to be adopting, as well as drawing some clearer lines of what is expected and what will not be tolerated by members of our community.
So kind of along those same lines, there were several questions about your thoughts about the Greek system in general. So one in particular, Vice Chancellor, are you a supporter of the Greek system? I've eventually concluded that the preservation of the Greek societies in the name of tradition have done more to hurt student mental and physical health, perpetuate systematic racism and classism, and has dramatically affected our reputation as a national party school. And this issue plays into your discussion of the 4 pillars. There were several along those same lines.
Yeah. So, having been in the job 3 weeks, here's my instinct. My instinct is that fraternities and sororities can be very powerful organizations for socialization, for a long-term connection with people that share common experiences and values and all those sort of things. Certainly in the African American community, fraternities and sororities are huge and play a long sort of outsized influence in terms of organizing the community. I did not pledge a fraternity because we were not allowed to at the Naval Academy. And quite frankly, certainly as an African-American man in the South, I feel that loss, really, I do. And so I understand that, respect that, comma. There's activity which is illegal. Activity which would be illegal and would not be tolerated if it were done anywhere else, and therefore should not be tolerated on a college campus. Principally as relates to hazing rituals, which are illegal. certainly as it relates to the consumption of illegal narcotics, and as it relates to the consumption of alcohol, enabling consumption in excess and irresponsibly, which enables behavior which is illegal that would not be tolerated if it were not on a campus. I am aware of some of the conversations about fraternities and questions of inclusion or exclusion. And so my way of thinking about this problem set, at least now, is to engage our students that are involved in the Greek system, as well as engaging our alumni who are members of fraternities and sororities, to say that the Greek systems, the strengths of them, need to be preserved, and everything else needs to conform with the overall message of EQB that we are instilling in our students. And so we need to have a conversation and draw new lines, if needed, about what is acceptable and what is not. And by what is not, I mean what is really not acceptable. If we decide to draw a hard line on narcotics, the response from me will be, do not try me on this. Because if we make clear, absolutely clear, that the use of narcotics will result in immediate suspension or expulsion, I'm not saying that's the policy, I'm just saying if that's one thing, one way we could go. If we did that, and having been fairly warned, you decide to consume, use, or distribute narcotics anyway, you will find me to be most unforgiving. So we'll see.
Okay. There were some questions about the rankings that you mentioned and getting Sewanee to #1. So I'm going to put two together. With the 43rd ranking in mind that you mentioned earlier, what are some things that are hindering Sewanee's standing? Right. And then second question, I know many families and international students look to U.S. News and World Reports, but it is a terrible judge of colleges. Is there a way to celebrate Sewanee in such a way that downplays the power of U.S. News?
Well, let me answer those questions this way. I absolutely believe that there are special strengths of our university that cannot possibly be captured in the U.S. News and World Report ranking or any other ranking, right? It is that special alchemy that we discussed before about the connection that professors and students have, about the beauty of this environment in which we live, about the sense that EQB are not simply 3 collections of letters, but is actually a real spirit that we try to live by here and that connects us across generations, about our connectedness to this region and understanding the best of our region, the best of our history, even as we grapple with the challenges of it, as a means of helping to understand ourselves better and exporting the best of ourselves to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. Those are things that, yes, absolutely, 1,000%, that we have to be much more, much better about figuring out how we communicate and why that should be an attractive thing for students to come and study and engage. And there are absolutely things that U.S. News and World Report studies and has as criteria that we should just objectively be better on, right? We need to be better on our 4-year graduation rate. We need to be better on our percentage of students that are Pell Grants. We need to be better on the diversity of our student body. Like these are sorts of things that in answer to the first question, that is just kind of like some of the kind of basic blocking and tackling about how we recruit students, how we track them while they're here, how we support them while they're here, that we would need to be doing a better job of anyway. And in so doing, is quite frankly some of the low-hanging fruit that will improve our rankings, which gets to the final point. as I said before, of course, we don't want to be blindly beholden to U.S. News and Report or any other ranking system. And yet, regrettably, I mean, this is just kind of like the best of a worst sort of system we have. I mean, as we engage with, as I say, these younger people, this smaller group of people that are going to be shopping, right? They're going to be shopping, and quite frankly, they're going to be getting better deals in terms of applying college than kids who just applied to college just 5 years earlier, because the number of situations is going to be so much worse. And so we have to be able to be strong enough on the quantitative aspect of that ranking, so they'll at least give us a hearing on the subjective aspects of what makes Sewanee so special, and therefore can be persuaded to come and study with us as opposed to going elsewhere if we're the right fit for them.
So a couple more COVID questions. First, what do you plan to do with students that test positive for COVID? Meaning, where will they be placed? How will they be medically treated? If they have to leave, what will happen with their tuition? And will the students be responsible for cost of testing? And will additional medical personnel be recruited?
Sure. So let's make sure that we're actually sort of talking about the right thing. So there is the testing positive for the novel coronavirus, and then there is developing COVID-19, the disease that comes from it. You can test positive for the novel coronavirus and be completely asymptomatic. You can test positive for the novel coronavirus and not develop COVID-19. You can develop COVID-19 and have very mild symptoms, or you can develop COVID-19 and go into multi-organ failure and be at risk of death. And so for students that test positive for the novel coronavirus, but are asymptomatic or very mildly symptomatic, hopefully we catch them as positive before they're symptomatic, right? That's the best case. For those students who can get home easily within a day's drive, either they drive themselves or have somebody come get them, we will encourage them to go home and to quarantine there for 14 days. That is for two reasons. One, we have to preserve our limited capability here on the mountain for isolation and for healthcare for those students who cannot get home. There are exactly 37 ICU beds within a 25-mile radius of All Saints Chapel. That is not a lot. And so we want those students who can get back home and who can have access to the healthcare they need so they develop COVID-19, develop a very serious case of COVID-19, to be able to access those resources elsewhere so that we can preserve the resources for those that need them here on the mountain that either can't, that for whatever reason can't leave. Now, as I said, you can test positive and be asymptomatic, right? Just have maybe develop a very mild case of COVID-19. And so we are making provisions, although we're teaching all of our courses, almost all of them, in person, they will also all be available online, either be synchronously or asynchronously. So that if you have to quarantine, either at home in Birmingham or here in your dorm room, or if you have to isolate at St. Mary's, because we're making provisions to have isolation facilities there for 100 beds, that you can continue with your education until you're ready to come back for in-person classes.
There's another question about dining. How are we going to feed all of the students? How's the food service going to work?
Sure. Basically, the kind of three big things are we will be eating in shifts. We will be having social distancing inside and clerk, as well as encouraging people when they can to either eat outside or take away meals to eat elsewhere. And then we will not be having any self-serve, no self-serve buffets. Everybody will be feeding themselves. I'm sorry, they will be served, I should say. They will be served by feeding themselves. We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. How about a lighter one? Let's see. Someone wanted to know how your horseback lessons are going.
Glorious. Fantastic. Great. I love Tigger. Corinne just told me that apparently that there is she's got contracted by the Humane Society that there is a miniature donkey that needs rescuing. So she's going to acquire it, name him Eeyore. So we'll have Tigger and Eeyore at the Sewanee Equestrian Center, which will be a lot of fun. Yeah, it's great. I mean, so I've been riding since I was a boy. Got back into it substantially after I'd gotten married. And it's the one thing I do that completely takes my mind off of everything else when I do it. And so I have a weekly dressage lesson first thing Tuesday mornings now. It's on my calendar. Everybody knows the schedule around it. And I've been able to get out some great trail rides over the weekends too. So it's been fun.
So someone would like to know, what will you personally do to ensure that we have a much better selection of Sewanee bow ties? The selection has been mighty slim in the bookstore this last 25 years.
I'm with you. I'm on it. And if you have any recommendations, I'll be.
Do you have time for another one?
One more, sure. One more.
Okay. So there are a couple of questions about the Sewanee Global idea. One of your primary goals is economic development. What type of economic development do you propose other than trying to get new restaurants and grocery stores? And will university funds be used for such economic development? And then what do you mean by Sewanee Global? I don't know if those are.
Sure. I mean, so I think that we should be a premier conference and recreation place. We already do some of this now, right, with Sewanee Music Festival, et cetera. But I think we could be much more intentional about doing it on matters of. So I don't know if you've been able to, how many of you know about the Aspen Ideas Festival, where people gather in Aspen every summer, usually high-powered folks from industry, finance, politics, whatever, to talk about the issues of the day. I would love to have a version of that happens here in Sewanee with a distinctive Southern flair that helps to address the questions we face here in the South. Questions of healthcare, for example. What do we do about it? We have the worst health outcomes of any region in the country. We have a particular relationship to history that, particularly in this fraught moment, needs to be unpacked. What does that mean, particularly as we have our region becoming more and more diverse, and as we see political actors or poles of political power continue to shift? What's the future of country music, right? When Little Nas X, tops both the country and pop charts, how do we think about that? What does it mean for who we are as a right? I mean, there's a whole crop of great young Southern writers are coming through. I mean, this is the sort of thing which I think could be really quite attractive, particularly as you do it sort of really much more systematically and regularly. That also creates opportunities for our students who are here to have access to those sorts of discussions in real time, and others. And so. When I think through and so the question, would the university funds be done for this? There has been discussion for some time about creating an LLC that would be responsible for identifying economic development projects that are in the interest of the university and the community, to capitalize those projects, and to watch the returns that come out of them, for the purpose of both rewarding the investors in the LLC as well as providing resources for the university's core academic mission. This has not been set up yet. It's not policy yet, but it's an idea that I think has an awful lot of merit. And that because if you can simultaneously, if you are someone who loves Sewanee and you can help the university to develop the richness of its life and also make an investment that can make a return for you personally, that seems to me to be a win-win. Why would you not want to do that? It's a matter of execution, right? So watch this space. And as we continue to talk about it as a community, I suspect we'll get further along with something along those lines.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your generosity of your time and your directness and transparency. And I just want to thank everyone who was on the call. We had over 160 people, and Thank you all for your passion and love for Sewanee and all that you do. And there's no surprise that the most common question from this group was, how can we help? And so just know that you've got a loyal alumni group out there ready to help you. So
Great. Thank you so very much.
thanks for today.
Take care now. Bye-bye.